My name is Summer. Right now, I'm on the receiving end of a tirade from my mother-in-law over the phone. Why on earth is the house gone? What in the world were you thinking doing something like this? My mother-in-law complained without listening to my side of the story. She doesn't seem to realize she's the one at fault. I let out a sigh. That must have ticked her off because her voice gets even louder. You better explain to me exactly why you turned that house into an empty lot. Well, let me start from the beginning. I decided to give my mother-in-law a full account of what led to this. The story takes us back to when I was a college student. My long-lived grandfather passed away, and a dispute over his inheritance had erupted in our family. I wasn't a squabble over money, though. The issue was about what to do with Grandpa's old house. It would cost quite a bit to dispose of it. On the other hand, everyone in the family already owned a house or an apartment. Managing another property, my grandpa's house seemed too much to ask. That's when the buck passing began. Even though the house was old, it was still livable, and the land it sat on belonged to my grandpa too. Inheriting it could be a good asset, and it seemed perfect for someone wanting to live alone. That's when I volunteered to take over the house, with an enthusiastic, "Sure, go ahead," from everyone. The old house and land became mine. So while I was still a university student, I became the owner of a house and land. There were inheritance taxes, of course, but that was a separate matter. I temporarily borrowed money from my parents and worked part-time jobs to pay them back. By the time I graduated from university, the house and land were truly mine. After graduation, I started working at a publishing company. Then, a friend introduced me to a great guy, and we started dating. That's my husband, Robert. Robert agreed to live with me in my grandfather's house. The house was old and not very convenient, but Robert never complained. I appreciated him for that. This is why I enjoyed our newlywed life. However, our blissful married life soon faced an unexpected turn. One day, my mother-in-law visited us and said, "We want to move out of our current apartment. Can we stay here until we find a new place?" Her family included herself, my father-in-law, and my sister-in-law. In other words, 3 people would be moving into our home. I was lost for words. Well, I stuttered, to which my mother-in-law responded with a sly grin. The contract on our apartment is up soon, and we'd have to break it if we renewed. You'll help us save money, right? I protested, but this is all so sudden. But she continued, I'll help with the housework. Sounds good, right? And just like that, I was forced into living with my husband's family. Luckily, our house was spacious and we had rooms to spare. There would be no problem accommodating everyone. And from my perspective, as someone who kept working after marriage, having my mother-in-law's help with housework seemed like a good thing. But I couldn't shake off the fear that living together might strain our currently pleasant relationship. I hope we can get along well, I mumbled. Despite some anxiety, our cohabitation began. However, living together quickly proved troublesome. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law were always goofing around and never helped around the house. Even worse, my father-in-law would come home late at night and demand that I prepare meals. At first, I put up with it, but my patience soon wore thin. Please help me with the housework, mother-in-law. That's what you promised me first, I pleaded. Did I? She feigned innocence. Then my sister-in-law chimed in. How dare you talk back to your husband's parents? You're so insolent for a daughter-in-law. But this is my house, I argued. So what if it's your house? You are our daughter-in-law, aren't you? Well, yes, but whatever is our daughter-in-law's is ours, right? I was too flabbergasted to reply. In the end, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law continued their ways. They partied all the time and never lifted a finger to help around the house. I tried talking to my father-in-law about it, but he said, You are our daughter-in-law. You should respect us. Excuse me? There's nothing good that comes from a daughter-in-law defying her in-laws. It'll just end in divorce and you'll be thrown out. My father-in-law seemed to be under some misunderstanding. Surely, if I were a stay-at-home wife without a job, I would have concerns about life after divorce. But I have a job and own assets, such as a house and land. Being told to divorce doesn't hurt or itch me in the least. Besides, whether to divorce or not is something my husband and I should discuss and decide, not my in-laws. I was irked, but there was no point in talking back any further. I'll take it as a good thing that I understood they wouldn't listen. Anyway, I'll have them leave, I muttered to myself. But it wasn't that easy. When I brought up the subject of moving, both my father-in-law and mother-in-law would change the topic. They'd find this or that reason to keep delaying leaving. Thinking it was strange, I consulted my husband. Do you really think they intend to move out? Now that you mention it, they do seem to be dragging their feet. I don't like the thought of them squatting here indefinitely. They might have a reason. We should look into this. Yeah, let's ask our private detective friend. So our opinion was settled. At any cost, if we had to pay for the move, we wanted my mother-in-law and sister-in-law out. That was my first wish. About a month after that, one day, when I was about to scold my mother-in-law who still wasn't doing anything, she came out with this first. Summer, I want to apologize to you for always causing you trouble. Apologize? Why don't we take a family trip together? That was her proposal. After moving in, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law had done nothing and left everything up to me. Far from that, they seemed to regret their haughty attitudes and pushing the housework onto me. So they thought they should apologize, it seemed. They'd discuss and concluded that a bonding trip would be the best. Needless to say, I thought if they felt that way, they should leave. But it was hard to complain to someone who was being humble. I chose a conciliatory approach. Both of us may have misunderstandings. It might be nice to go on a trip. Do you agree? My mother-in-law was so delighted. Then my sister-in-law, also happy, added, We were thinking of an overseas trip. Where would you like to go? Anywhere is fine. Well, we'll decide. Oh, right. Suddenly, my sister-in-law interrupted herself. She turned to me with an apologetic look. You see, we don't have any money right now. Huh? You don't have money? They had no money, but proposed a trip. Really, they were exasperating people. That aside, saying that they had no money could only mean one thing. As I was thinking, the exact words I expected came out of my sister-in-law's mouth. Could you lend us some money? Just as I was thinking to refuse, my mother-in-law said something unexpected. Your dad is retiring, so he will receive a retirement bonus. We can pay with that. You just have to front the money for now." By dad, she means my father-in-law. Given his age, his retirement was indeed due. Moreover, the retirement bonus wasn't a mere assumption. It's a guaranteed sum of money that will surely come. Although I was slightly suspicious, I thought the money would definitely come in. And the matter we were discussing on our side required a bit more time, so it might be better to accept my mother-in-law's invitation and avoid causing tension between us. So, I accepted the idea of the trip. After that, I was informed by my mother-in-law and sister-in-law that they had decided on England as our destination. "The flight departs at noon from JFK International Airport." "Understood." "And it seems like the trip is going to cost quite a bit. But as we said before, can you front the money for us?" "Yes, I'll cover it." Even though it was just fronting the money, it was not a small sum. But at this point, I couldn't say no. Moreover, it seems like they've already made the reservation, so I might as well enjoy it. I gave the requested amount to my mother-in-law. Then, on the day of the trip, the meeting time was 3 hours before our flight. My husband Robert, who had been working the previous day, was staying at a hotel near the airport. Therefore, he was not with me. On the bus heading to the airport, I decided to try calling Robert. At that moment, a call came from Robert's phone before I could call him. "Hello, Robert? Are you awake?" I spoke, thinking it was my husband, but it was my mother-in-law's voice I heard over the phone. "Summer, where are you now?" "Mother-in-law?" "Yes, where are you?" "I'm on the bus heading to the airport." "That's unfortunate. We're about to get on the plane now." "What?" I was confused. Then my mother-in-law, with a sarcastic voice, dropped this bombshell. "Actually, we're leaving at 9. Sorry." "You lied to me?" "It's a family trip, so we're going to enjoy it just as a family." "What about my ticket? Canceling right on the day of departure is..." "That's fine. You were never included in the count." My mother-in-law laughed loudly. Apparently, this was all part of her plan. As I clutched my phone in frustration, my sister-in-law's voice came on. "Are you upset? You're upset, aren't you?" "Do you enjoy this kind of thing?" "It's fun. Bye now." At the moment, the line went dead with a strange noise, and the call was cut off. Immediately, I called back my husband. I could hear the ringing, but it wouldn't connect. Ultimately, I arrived at the airport just before the flight's departure time. When I asked the airport staff, they said that the plane had already entered the runway. There was nothing I could do but see the plane off. It would take a little over 15 hours for the plane I waved goodbye to arrive at its destination, and my mother-in-law and her cohorts would be back in about 10 days. I had plenty of time. Play games with me, and I'll show you who's the better player. I went straight home. I immediately contacted a demolition company and asked them to tear down my house. I also contacted a moving company to haul out all the belongings in the house. But it wasn't just my stuff in the house. There were things belonging to my mother-in-law, father-in-law, and sister-in-law. And because this was so sudden, I didn't have a new home ready. After some consideration, I decided to use one of the warehouses that was part of my grandfather's inheritance. This warehouse was something my grandfather had used for his business, and nobody was using it now. However, there was a large parking lot in front of the warehouse, which was currently being used by the people in the neighborhood. I had everything moved to that warehouse. After that, I notified my parents that I was going to rebuild the house. My parents asked why, but I told them I'd explain the details later and hung up the phone. I finally had a chance to take a breather when it was late at night. I had just fallen asleep when I noticed my phone ringing. It was an unknown number, and it was early morning, still dim outside. I hesitated but decided to answer the phone. "Hello? Is this Summer?" The person on the phone was my husband, Robert. "Robert, what do you want now?" "Sorry, has your fever gone down now?" "What? What are you talking about?" "Huh? I heard you had a high fever and—" As I listened more carefully to my husband's story, I could see my mother-in-law's careful maneuvers. Apparently, Robert had been told the correct meeting time. In other words, because the meeting time was early in the morning, he had purposely stayed at a hotel near the airport. When he went there at the meeting time, he quickly noticed that I wasn't there. When he asked my mother-in-law about it, she told him that I had gone to the hospital with a high fever. Robert was worried about me, but he thought he couldn't call the hospital. Furthermore, my mother-in-law pretended to be passing on a message from me and told Robert to enjoy the trip. So he thought he would enjoy the trip for my sake and departed without contacting me. But I guess my mother-in-law knew that Robert would call me eventually. She called me on Robert's phone just before departure. After they had riled me up, my sister-in-law pretended to accidentally break Robert's phone. Robert believed my sister-in-law's words that it wasn't on purpose and forgave her on the spot. But during the flight, he realized something was strange and called me as soon as he arrived at the hotel. "You've got to be kidding me! Even my sister was in on it? What the hell are they doing?" "Robert, are you pissed at what they did?" "Of course! I was looking forward to going on the trip with you, Summer." So it seems that Robert had nothing to do with it. If that was the case, I decided to get my husband's cooperation. I discussed the ongoing plan with Robert. "So that's how things are moving," I said. "I see. That sounds interesting," he responded. "I've prepped everything, Robert. You just need to act like you're enjoying the trip." "Understood." "And I have one favor to ask of you."
"What's that?"
"Bring back some souvenirs for me and also some for my colleagues." This was my only concern. Whenever one goes on a trip, it's customary to bring back souvenirs for colleagues at my workplace. In fact, I had even been asked to buy some branded items. I could say I was left behind, but that would be too embarrassing. It was a dilemma for me. But if Robert was on my side, it would change the situation. Now, everything was settled. I provided the list of souvenirs to Robert and focused on what I needed to do. After sunrise, I had a demolition team come over. After getting a quote, they immediately began tearing down the house. The work finished quickly, and the plot of land was cleared in no time. A few days later, my in-laws returned home. They started causing a commotion in front of the empty plot of land. Then they called me and started complaining non-stop. "That's the whole story. Did you understand?" I asked. "You've got to be kidding!" my mother-in-law yelled again. Even so, my mother-in-law was just on the other side of the phone. I wasn't scared at all, so I calmly retorted, "Well, It's pointless to say anything now. I've already demolished the house. What happened to our belongings? Did you dispose of them? No, I didn't dispose of them. I'm keeping them. You're nothing but a thief! I'm only keeping them. I'll return them if you pay. Pay? For what? For the trip and the moving costs. You did say you would at least pay for the trip, didn't you? See, you should pay up soon. At that, my mother-in-law fell silent. It seemed she was at a loss for a reply. Then I heard my sister-in-law whispering from behind her. At once, my mother-in-law asked me energetically, "Before anything, I want to know if our belongings are safe. Where did you take them?" They are in the warehouse my grandfather used to use. Anyway, I won't return them unless you pay. But your husband's retirement pension is coming, isn't it? That, yes, but, then please pay me back. I'll return your belongings once you do. With that, I hung up. Still, my mother-in-law kept calling incessantly. Finally, annoyed, I blocked all her calls. Feeling refreshed, my husband Robert arrived at the weekly mansion where I was staying. "I'm back, Summer!" "Welcome back! Did you bring any souvenirs?" "Of course I did." "Thank you." I had considered returning to my parents' home. However, I didn't want to worry them. So, I informed my parents that we would be living in a weekly mansion for a while as we were rebuilding our house. Then, I actually rented the weekly mansion and moved there. I've been staying in touch with Robert regularly and had informed him about the move. So, after his return, he came directly to me. My in-laws must have found it strange that he was acting separately. I was nervous about getting found out, but I'm glad things worked out this way. "By the way, Summer, if you get money from Mom, do you plan to forgive her?" "If she promises not to interfere in our lives in the future, I plan to return her belongings and forgive her." "I'm just wondering if she'll pay up without a fuss." "Don't worry, the warehouse is locked, and she can't take anything out without paying me back." There's no way to get into the locked warehouse. If they think it's possible, they'll give up and pay. I was confident about this. However, I couldn't expect a reasonable response from my in-laws, who lack common courtesy. I was reminded of this the following early morning. My phone rang in the dim morning hours. "Who at this hour?" I looked at my phone with sleepy eyes. It was another unknown number. When I answered the call, the person on the other side said, "I'm sorry for calling so early in the morning. I'm from the police." Police? I instantly woke up. I sat upright and listened to the conversation. There had been a disturbance at my grandfather's warehouse. It seems that a local resident who uses the warehouse parking lot had reported it. "So when we arrived, we found an intruder who was causing a ruckus in the warehouse and apprehended them." "I see. So you've caught the culprit." "But the intruder says they're a family member of the warehouse owner. They asked us to contact the owner." "Wait, my family?" I had a bad feeling. When Robert and I rushed to the scene, several police cars were parked there. And in one of them were my in-laws. "Summer, help us!" "My mother-in-law." My suspicions were confirmed. The intruders were my in-laws. "Are these individuals indeed your family?" "They are technically my family." Robert and I apologized profusely to the police officer who arrived on the scene. In addition, we had to bow our heads to the local people who had heard the commotion. After we apologized, we heard my in-laws' side of the story with the police officer present. This was my in-laws' story. They claimed they didn't have enough money to cover the moving and travel expenses I had asked for. Apparently, they had spent my father-in-law's retirement funds on traveling and repaying their own debts. That was challenging enough. But then my sister-in-law chimed in with, "I've got a blind date tomorrow. Where are my clothes?" After some squabbles, they decided to take just what they needed from the warehouse. That's why the three of them broke into it. But once we got inside, we found photos of us partying with men mixed in with our belongings. This was a result of the investigation I had commissioned. In fact, when Robert and I asked a private detective to investigate my in-laws, it turned out that my mother-in-law and sister-in-law had been goofing around with men. These men worked in the nightlife industry, and my in-laws had poured quite a lot of money into them. They had even taken on debts, some of which they repaid using my father-in-law's retirement funds. On the other hand, my father-in-law was having an affair with a younger woman from his workplace. Despite the nice ring to his retirement, the truth was that he had been fired for his affair. I received these reports and photo evidences just before my in-laws left for the trip. When they returned from the trip, I planned to use this as leverage to kick them out. But with things turning out this way, I had moved the photos to the warehouse along with my stuff. So, they broke into the warehouse, found the photos we had investigated, and that led to a fight over each other's misbehavior. Seems like that's the punchline of this whole fiasco. They totally brought this on themselves, I murmured. My mother-in-law shouted at me in anger. "What were you planning by taking these photos?" Like I care. When I retorted, my father-in-law yelled at me. "What have you done? This could ruin our family." "Well, that's your fault, isn't it?" "What? How dare you? As a daughter-in-law?" "Enough. If you have complaints, I'll sue you for trespassing." They'd all be arrested if it came to that. Realizing this, the three of them promptly quieted down. However, it was clear that none of them had the means to pay me back. So, I proposed another option to them. "Would you rather work at a cannery to pay me back or get arrested for trespassing?" Predictably, they chose the former, and I managed to get them jobs at a friend's cannery. They're working there every day now, earning the money they owe me. Meanwhile, I rebuilt a house on the land where my grandfather's house once stood. It's a brand new house that still retains traces of my grandfather's house. Robert and I are starting our married life anew in this convenient new home.